Hello, Internet. I just wanted to quickly compare multi-output instruments and the workflow in Logic, Cubase, and Studio One. So I'm in Logic 10 to start with. I have an instrument track loaded up. I'll load Maschine into that. And within Maschine, I'll quickly load just a simple beat I made earlier. So the first thing I like to do is make sure I have the MIDI on the instrument track. So to do that in Maschine, we make sure we're outputting to MIDI notes, activate our MIDI input, and then drag in the MIDI file. And before we want to play, just make sure we're on an empty pattern in Maschine so we don't play two at the same time. So now, great, it works. All right, so to route some of these sounds to their individual outputs, what I want to do is pop over to the Logic mixer, and there's an X button right next to the instrument. So I'll just click that a few times to give me a bunch of different outputs. And then in Maschine, I'll go over to the mixer, and I can route each of these sounds to their individual outputs. So let me just play this so I know which sounds are actually playing. Great. So hopefully I have all of the sounds now playing through their individual outputs. You can see down here. And then the next thing I like to do to save some CPU power and also to make it easier for mixing is bounce the individual tracks to their audio stems. So the way to do that in Logic is you select the track, and we'll go over to File, Bounce, Track in Place. Now before you do this, make sure that the length of your project is accurate, otherwise you'll be sitting there for a while. So go to Bounce, Track in Place. You'll get an option of Include Instrument Multi-Outs, and then Add Additional Tracks. So I'll do that. It'll bounce that out. And now, if we mute the instrument track, you'll notice I have the audio stems for the sounds. Now what you'll notice is Logic created a few additional audio inputs, actually, audio tracks in the mixer. So now we have all of the aux tracks that we used to initially route Maschine, plus all of the bounced audio tracks. So there's going to be quite a lot of tracks here. After this, you can kind of disable this by unloading the instrument, but you're then going to lose the instrument settings unless you save it within Maschine. So let me flip over to Cubase and show you how it works in there. All right, I'm now in Cubase Pro 8. Now I'm going to load up an instrument track. And I love the search functionality of Cubase for finding exactly what you need. So we'll load up Maschine. And same thing as before. Load up our beat. And then change the routing. So when we drag in the MIDI file, what's interesting is Cubase creates all of these extraneous MIDI files. I'm not sure why, but we can quickly remove those. And change the pattern. So now we have the beat again as a MIDI file, and we can route the individual inputs or the individual sounds to their respective outputs. So we can activate outputs here, click a bunch that we want, and then the great thing about Cubase is you can assign a keyboard shortcut to bring up the instrument again. Makes it very quick to use. So once again, in our track, we can route the outputs of some of these sounds. If we go to the Cubase mixer, you'll see that it's created a bunch of outputs, and if we play, we see the faders on the respective outputs. So now if I want to bounce this down to audio, what I can do is click on the region, go to Edit, Render in Place, Render, and it'll bounce the audio for each individual sound that we've outputted. Now compared to Logic, Cubase happens to also bounce the outputs that actually had no audio going through them, so it does create some extraneous audio files, but you can delete those pretty easily. So we can mute this track, and the nice thing about Cubase is you can actually come here and disable the track, and what that'll do is that'll unload the instrument from memory as well as preventing it from using any CPU, but it's very easy to get it back to make some edits. So I can play the audio here. It's playing, and then if I needed to make a change, I could just come enable the track again, go back into Maschine, and it has my whole project still loaded. That's really nice. Back in the mixer, you can see it did the same thing as Logic. It created extra outputs versus the ones that we had previously routed to. But at least compared to Logic, you're saving the instrument state, and you can disable it as well. So that's Cubase. So the last one, let me switch over to Studio One. All right, lastly, we're in Studio One, and I'm just going to say now that this is going to be my favorite when it comes to this workflow. So I have an empty project loaded up here. Studio One has a great search function, so I can just search for Maschine, drag it in, loads the instrument. You know the drill by now. We'll load our beat. Change our routing. Drag the instrument in. And make sure we're on a different pattern. So this works just like everything else. And now if we want to route those sounds to their individual outputs, call up the mixer, and under instruments here, you can expand, which brings up the outputs. And so we can just click to add outputs. And similar to Cubase, I've attached a key command to load up the instrument. Very handy. So we can come to the mixer, in Maschine, assign the outputs again, just to show you. Now when we play it, you'll see playing the outputs. So now if we want to bounce this down to audio, Studio One makes it so easy. Right-click on the track, transform to audio track. Render all channels, preserve instrument state, and remove instrument, which is going to save you CPU and RAM. Hit OK. Now it's not created extra tracks, it's just taken the existing audio tracks that you had and put the audio for each individual sound on them, so you're not cluttering up the mixer. It does, like Cubase, create empty tracks even if there's no audio routed to them, but those are easy to delete. But now you can see we have the audio. There's no instrument loaded anymore, but you'll see that there's MIDI kind of being shown on these individual tracks. So if I want to go back to the previous state, just transform back to instrument track. And then you have the instrument track back, including the existing routing. I don't think it can get any easier than that. This is really excellent for workflow. Anyway, hopefully that was a helpful comparison for everybody. I'll see you next time.